They gave him the wood. They gave him the tools. They gave him the measurements and the location and even complimented his craftsmanship when he was done. What they never gave him, not once in 31 years, was his freedom. Whitley Moore thought he was commissioning a gallows. A structure of punishment. A warning carved in white oak and iron, meant to break the spirit of anyone who dared to run. He didn't realize he had just handed the most dangerous man on his plantation exactly what he needed. Because Samuel wasn't just a carpenter. He was a man who thought in layers, who understood that the same structure built to end a life could be redesigned to save one. And tonight, at the crossroads off Miller's Lane, Whitley Moore was about to learn the difference between owning a man's hands and owning his mind. Welcome to Historic Crimes TV, where you get the true story of events that have happened in the past which helped shape the history of the world that we are living in. If you enjoy our video, encourage us to post more by liking the video, comment where you are watching from, share it with someone, and make sure to subscribe for more. The morning mist still clung to the red Georgia soil when Samuel picked up his first tool of the day. He did not stretch. He did not yawn. He simply reached into his worn leather satchel, closed his fingers around the familiar handle of his drawer knife, and began. Samuel had been carving, cutting, and constructing since before he could read, which was still, technically, illegal, but he had learned both. Woodwork from watching his father's hands move like music across pine and oak, and letters from a discarded Bible page he'd found pressed beneath the floorboard of the slave quarters when he was 7 years old. He taught himself in secret. By lamplight. Mouthing the shapes of words like prayers. He is 31 years old now. Lean, precise, with hands that carried more intelligence than most men ever showed in their faces. His master, Whitley Moore, called him the best set of hands on this whole county. He said it the way a man speaks about a fine axe or a reliable mule, with appreciation, yes, but also with the cold assumption of ownership. Whitley Moore owned 400 acres of tobacco and cotton in Benton County. He owned 23 enslaved people, and he owned Samuel, whom he rented out to neighboring plantations for construction jobs, keeping every coin Samuel owned. Whitley Moore was not the worst man in Georgia. He would have said so himself, with genuine conviction. He didn't beat people every day. He fed them enough to keep them working. He believed this made him decent. But Samuel knew what Whitley Moore was, the way a tree knows a drought, not in words, but in what it costs you to survive him. It was a Tuesday in late August, the kind of heat that sits on your chest like a stone, when Whitley Moore called Samuel to the main house. Samuel wiped his hands on his canvas trousers and walked across the yard, past the drying racks of tobacco leaf, past the well where young Celia drew water every morning with eyes that never quite looked all the way up. He stepped onto the back porch and waited. He never knocked. Knocking implied equality. Moore came out with a cup of coffee and didn't offer Samuel any. "I got a job for you," Moore said. "A special one." He leaned against the post, swirling his cup. "You heard about the trouble up at Callaway Place? 3 runaways in a month. 3. People are getting nervous, Samuel. Nervous people make bad decisions. The county needs a deterrent." He let the word hang. "They want a proper structure built at the crossroads off Miller's Lane. Something permanent. Something visible." Moore looked at Samuel directly. "A gallows. A hanging post wide enough for 2, sturdy enough to last 20 years. They want it to mean something when people see it." Samuel felt his jaw tighten. He kept his face loose. "Years of practice." "Yes, sir," he said. "I told them you were the finest carpenter in the 3 counties." Moore smiled. "Don't make a liar of me." Samuel nodded once and walked back to his workshop. He sat down in the quiet of his shed, surrounded by the smell of fresh-cut wood and linseed oil, and he stared at the wall for a long time. He was being asked to build the instrument of his own people's death. He picked up his pencil. He began to draw. What no one understood, not Moore, not the county commissioners, not the white men who would inspect the finished structure and nod in grim satisfaction, was that Samuel thought in layers. He thought about weight. He thought about load-bearing joints. He thought about the difference between wood that holds and wood that merely appears to hold. He thought about linchpins and trap mechanisms and the precise angle of a crossbeam. And somewhere in the long, quiet nights of designing, surrounded by his drawings and his grief, Samuel began to think about a different kind of use. He thought about Ezra. Ezra was Samuel's closest companion in the quarters, a broad, quiet man who had once been a field foreman before Moore broke his status as punishment for looking a white visitor too directly in the eyes. Ezra had not spoken for 3 days after that demotion. When he finally did, he said only this: "A man can only be reduced so many times before what's left of him decides to rise." Samuel began to talk to Ezra in the evenings. Quietly. Slowly. The way you approach a fire you're not sure is still burning. He also talked to Ruth, the cook, the keeper of schedules, the woman who knew every pattern of Moore's household better than Moore himself. Ruth knew when Moore drank. She knew when the overseers rode to town. She knew the rhythms of the house like a clockmaker knows gears. And he talked to young Thomas, 17 years old, fast as water, who had already attempted escape twice and bore the scarred evidence of why he hadn't succeeded. Over 6 weeks, as the gallows took shape at the crossroads, so did something else. Samuel built it beautifully. There is no other word. The main post was white oak, 8 inches thick, sunk 4 feet into the earth with a stone and mortar base. The crossbeam was notched and pegged with such precision that the structure didn't creak in the wind, it simply stood, immovable, like a terrible piece of permanence. The trap mechanism operated on a simple iron lever, counterweighted, so that even a single person of moderate strength could operate it. The county commissioner, a man named Harold Pruitt, walked around it twice, pressed his boot against the post, and said, "Remarkable work, boy." Samuel stood 3 feet behind him and said nothing. Whitley Moore collected his fee the following Friday, $40 for 6 weeks of Samuel's labor. He gave Samuel nothing. He did pat him on the shoulder and say, "Good work reflects well on both of us." Samuel went back to his shed and sharpened his tools. Until they caught the light. It was October. Tobacco was in. The night air had finally cooled. Whitley Moore had celebrated the harvest the way he always did, with whiskey, cards, and the company of his 2 overseers, Draper and Holt. By 10 o'clock, Draper and Holt had ridden back to their homes. By 11, Moore was alone on the porch with his bottle. By midnight, the bottle was empty and Moore was in that deep, ugly sleep of a man who has never once feared the dark. Ruth had put something in the last of his coffee. Not poison. She was too careful and too smart for that. Just enough of the root mixture old Agnes had shown her decades ago to make a man sleep like iron until morning. Samuel moved first. He crossed the yard without a lantern, feeling the ground beneath his feet the way a carpenter feels a surface, reading it, trusting it. Ezra came from the left. Thomas from the right, quiet as creek water. 2 others, James and old Pompey, who had said nothing but yes when asked, waited near the wagon. They carried Moore out of the house the way you carry heavy timber, carefully, efficiently, without drama. His head lolled. He muttered something in his sleep. Ruth watched from the kitchen window and then closed the curtain. The ride to Miller's Lane took 20 minutes. Whitley Moore woke up cold. He opened his eyes and saw stars. He tried to move and found he could not. His wrists were bound behind the post, Samuel's post, built to hold. The rope was a good rope. Samuel had always used good rope. When Moore finally focused his eyes forward, he saw them standing in a semicircle before him. 6 people. Holding lanterns. Looking at him with expressions he had never seen on their faces before, or perhaps had never looked closely enough to notice. Samuel stepped forward. "Moore," he said. "Not Mr. Moore. Not sir. Just Moore." The word fell into the night like a stone into still water. Moore found his voice. It came out high and frightened. "What is it, Samuel? What is this? You untie me right now, you hear me? Right now, or so help me God." "You said this structure was meant to deter," Samuel said calmly. "You said it needed to mean something when people saw it." "Samuel. You rented me out for $40 and gave me nothing. For 6 weeks of work." Samuel's voice didn't rise. "You broke Ezra's rank because of how he looked at a man. You sold Thomas's mother to a rice plantation in South Carolina 3 years ago and told Thomas she had run away." He paused. "Ruth told us the truth." Moore was shaking now. "I'll have you all hanged. Every last one of you, I will have you." "We know," Samuel said quietly. "That is why we are here tonight." The moment before the decision. The moment where revenge and justice look identical, and a person has to choose which one they're actually holding. Samuel stood at the lever. He had designed it. He had balanced it. He knew, to the inch, how it worked. He looked at Whitley Moore, this man who had never once seen him, not truly, not as a person who thought and dreamed and grieved, and he felt something move through him like wind through a gap in the wall. He thought about the 7-year-old boy with the Bible page. He thought about his father's hands. He thought about every nail he had ever driven into wood that belonged to someone else. He did not pull the lever. He stepped back. He looked at Ezra, then at Thomas, then at old Pompey, who had seen more decades of this than any of them. Pompey nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly what Samuel was and wasn't going to do. Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it in the lantern light so Moore could see it clearly. "This is a full account," Samuel said. "Written in my hand. Names, dates, specific incidents. The sale of Thomas's mother. The beating of Celia in March. The money you collected for my labor over 11 years. He folded it back. "There is a man in Savannah, a free black man, a minister who has connections to people in Philadelphia who collect these accounts. Journalists. Abolitionists. Men with printing presses." Moore stared at him. "We are leaving tonight," Samuel said. "All 6 of us. By morning, we will be far enough that your overseers won't find us before we reach the next station north." He tucked the paper away. "If you send men after us, this account reaches Philadelphia. Your name. Your deeds. Printed." He leaned slightly forward. "Or you report nothing. You wake up tied to your own crossroads post and you tell people you drank too much and don't remember. And we disappear, and you go on being Whitley Moore, and we go on being alive and free." He let the silence do its work. Then Samuel picked up his leather satchel, the same one he had carried every morning of his working life, and he turned his back on Whitley Moore for the last time. The others followed him into the dark. They found Whitley Moore at dawn, still tied to the post, hoarse from shouting into a night that had not answered him. He told Draper and Holt he remembered nothing. That he must have sleepwalked. That Samuel and the others must have run in the night. He never filed a report. He never sent men north. No one who knew Whitley Moore could quite explain why. A year later, a short account appeared in a Pennsylvania abolitionist pamphlet. It described, in precise and architectural detail, the life of an enslaved carpenter in Georgia, the structures he built, the labor that was taken from him, the years he spent perfecting a craft in service of a system that refused to see him as a man. The account was signed only, Samuel Carpenter. Free. The gallows at Miller's Lane stood for 2 more years before a storm took the crossbeam down. Nobody rebuilt it. Somehow, after that night, the will to do so had gone out of the county, quiet and unexplained, like a lamp that runs out of oil. The white oak post remained in the earth a while longer, rootless, purposeless, slowly being reclaimed by the red Georgia ground that had never belonged to Whitley Moore in the first place. A man can only be reduced so many times before what's left of him decides to rise. Ezra.